It's time to start batch number 601. Since I started doing these series, I started clear back at batch 500, so we've done 100 batches. And I haven't really pushed because I've had about 6 or 7 weeks now that I've done almost nothing. Took quite a break during the holiday time. Now I'm going to really try to concentrate on getting these freezers emptied and the things freeze dried, and then checking my inventory and see what I'm missing. Number one child was moving into a new place, and so we loaded up a full bin of freeze dried. And while we was doing that, we noticed that we did have some deficiencies. We're low on beef stew. We haven't made beef stew in a year or two. So anyway, so beef stew is on the list of things that's going to be made soon. Other than that, we're going to try to empty a lot of stuff out of the freezer. We have a lot of stuff in there waiting. Some of it needs to be cooked first. Some of it already is ready to go right on the trays and freeze dried. We'll get started, find out how far we can get. So tray 1, so what I've got for this batch is miscellaneous things. They're already weighed, so for bagging I can use that weight. So I have a little bit of macaroni and cheese. This is from October. Some of these have been sitting in the freezer for quite a while. Again, this one's from back in October. This is a half-pound block. These are 1-pound blocks. And it's a good thing I weighed them before because I'm going to have to mix things on trays. So it's $18.79 for that tray. Okay, tray 2. Now we'll get that one on one. And I'm going to go ahead and add one of the crushed tomatoes on there. So I have 380 grams, 380, and so I'll be able to check that later and get the water back in that it's required. So this is some crushed, probably canned crushed tomatoes from some time in the past that's been sitting in the freezer waiting, and it was 380 grams. These should be 1-pound blocks of rice. If you'll notice, this has a little piece of parchment in there. That is where the stainless steel rod was. So I put this, I don't even know if you can see that, put this little piece of plastic on the rice before it's frozen and put this stainless steel rod in. It was in there like that. Then after it was frozen, I was able to take that out of there, but then I realized I was going to lose that hole. I wouldn't be able to find it again, so I rolled up a little piece of parchment and just put it in there so I'd be able to find it again. I'd be able to just slip in the thermometer. It's ready to go. It's the right angle. I don't have to drill it. So that seems like that's going to work out nicely. Tray 3, there's another piece of parchment. So I don't have any more half blocks right here. I can look in the freezer real quick. I found some refried beans from back in September. I'm going to go ahead and add one of these blocks to it. So these have some half-pound blocks. There we go. And then I'll take the piece of parchment out. As long as I remember to freeze them with these in there. So that seems to work very well. Okay, and tray 4. And I'll use another half block. So these have been sitting in the freezer for 5 or 6 months waiting their turn. Their turn has finally started. Got some cilantro lime pulled pork from, again, this would have been from maybe October. And these I hadn't popped out of the pans yet. I'll go ahead and just pop those out and get them on there. This is another one of the ones that I put the little rod in for a test. And the thermometer in there. Now those are ready for the freeze dryer. Got just short of 10 pounds to put in there because that one was a couple of 100 grams short of a pound. The other things are half pounds and pounds, so it's just a little less than 10 pounds. This has been pre-cooling for a few hours now because I got it started and then got busy doing other stuff and forgot to get back to it until now. Anyway, it's cold. It says that it's negative 64 right now. The thermometer under the front says negative 45-ish, and it's a little warmer, closer to the door. Anyway, it's cold. We'll get the food in there. We'll give it a few hours to really freeze, and then we can get it started. Of course, the chamber's already cold, so mainly we want to make sure that the food gets cold enough so that it doesn't instantly start boiling off when it gets a low enough pressure. Okay, starting at the bottom. The thermometers all show 5 degrees or less right now. Nice and cold still. Ready. Okay, I do not have a complete seal ring around there right now. I can see where the air is going in. I don't know if you can see that. You can see the little stripes. That's where air is being pulled in. Nice toasty warm air. So I'm using my frosting spatula and just putting it in between the seal and the front of the machine, giving it just the least little bit of twist, and that pushes the seal out. It does scratch the paint around that edge underneath the seal. However, it's aluminum under the paint. It's not going to rust, so I don't care. I want to have that seal sealed. Okay, it looks good now. Got a nice seal ring around there now. Gonna let it cool for a while longer so that the food has a chance to get that cold, the 40 below or 30 below, and then we'll get it started. And on this machine with the older software, that's pretty easy to do. With the older machine's firmware that it came with, I'm running it in custom mode, so I get this at the beginning of every batch. It's been going for 4.5 hours. I added more time. It's normally I have it set for just 6 hours, but that would only leave another hour and 20 minutes of freeze time for the food, which isn't really enough. 3.5 should be enough since the chamber is so cold already. And the temperature's gone up quite a bit since I put the food in, because the food was around 0 to 5 degrees, which was 60 degrees warmer than this. So if I want to change this, all I got to do is add time or subtract time. So we'll check that to see if the food is cold enough before 3.5 hours before it starts. So this is a good sized batch. It has plenty of water in it, and some of the things after the water's taken out on the outside layers, they'll kind of act as insulation. That's one of the problems, I suppose you could call it, of stacking them pretty high on the tray, is it takes a while for that warmth to get to the center of the items, like the rice or the macaroni and cheese. Anyway, so it'll take a while, but it always does on mine. So I'll be back in 2 days and we'll take them out and check them. So don't go away, it'll be just a second. So this batch that has 5 different things in it, including macaroni and cheese and cilantro lime pulled pork, has been going for 33.5 hours. They're up to temperature real well. The lowest one's 120 degrees. If I look back, and I did, at our previous batches of macaroni and cheese from batch 380, 81, and 82, and a cilantro lime pulled pork that was sometime earlier also, they finished in somewhere between 33.5 hours all the way up to 38.5 hours. For 38.5 hours, I'd need 5 more hours. It's late in the day. I don't want to go 5 more hours. They might be done now, but the only way I'll know for sure is to take them out, weigh them, and put them back in for at least 2 more hours, weigh them again to see if they've had any weight loss. Now, since I know that previous batches were somewhere between 33 and 38 hours, if I had a bigger body of data for these batches, for instance, the macaroni and cheese, 3 consecutive batches ranged from 33.5 to 37.5. So even if it were 37.5 right now or 38.5, I still wouldn't take them out and bag them without doing that dry check. Many years ago, I spent a couple of decades in a food industry, including bakeries and candy kitchens and some other types of things.
Yeehaw!
even if they had baked this item 1,000 times, 10,000 times before, they still wouldn't, simply because the oven went ding, take it out and package it. There's still testing involved, even if it's been done 1,000 times before. Just because the machine thinks it's done, we don't take its word for it and just go ahead and process it. The machine can't know. Even a very sophisticated machine, I would still at least spot check. So even if it had moisture meters of some kind buried in the trays, I would still do some spot checking. I still wouldn't trust that 100%. And with the tracking we do, I could do spot checking and then simply rework it if I found out later it wasn't complete. So that would be a possibility. But I don't really want to do it that way either. So because of the time, I think I'm just going to add more time and come back tomorrow and finish it up. Then I don't have to worry about it at all. Right now, the only problem with that is that it's within the last 15 minutes, about 6 minutes. And on this machine, once it gets below the 15 minutes, it turns off the heaters, and it doesn't seem like it turns the system back on just by giving it more time. My sister's machine looks like it will do that. You can just bump it back up and it just continues. Anyway, so I'm gonna have to let it stop and then restart it, I think, to accomplish what I need. And I think I might as well trade those outside 2 trays, the top and bottom, to the middle spot that dries better or slightly quicker, so that then tomorrow when I check, that's already been done. But I don't think I'm even going to bother with checking the weights right now, because I am going to give it that additional time. So we'll go ahead and bypass the rest of the time, rotate the trays, and then just simply restart it. Yeah. So I'm going to bypass the rest of that. And they are probably quite done, but I just don't want to spend 2 more hours tonight waiting for it. I should have stopped it a couple hours ago and checked it. Yeah. There's a very real possibility that they're already done. I'm just going to press add more dry time. I did close the drain valve, continue, and I'm not going to worry about the pump being not cool enough. So far it's about 33.5 hours. On the previous batches of these foods, the maximum one was 38.5 hours, so 5 more hours. So I'm going to go ahead and add 5 more hours right now. I'm going to add 3 hours right now, because then I'll rewarm it for the additional 2 hours in the morning, and that will give me the 5 hours. And then everything should work out just fine. So in 3 hours, it'll just put itself in the freeze only mode, and we'll come back and restart it in the morning, giving it 2 more hours. We'll give it 2 hours, and that will warm it back up. Then I'll do the dry check. So I'll be right back. Don't go away. When I got up and about today, I restarted the machine and gave it a couple more hours to both finish that 5 hours that I wanted to have, plus rewarm it so that I can take it out and weigh it. Now it's in the last few minutes. We'll bypass the rest of that time, take it out and weigh it, and then put it back in for the dry check. So I'll go ahead and bypass the rest of that with the down arrow. Okay, we'll get them out and check them. So starting with tray 1, which would move down to here, the mac and cheese feels nice and toasty. And this is 11:18. Okay, and tray 2, one that has some miscellaneous things on it, 10:32. Then we'll put those back up. I think I'm going to leave them where I just had them, because yep, I'm going to go ahead and leave them at the same spots. So tray 3, And that one is definitely cooler to the touch. And 1146 and tray 4. And yeah, definitely warmer than tray 3 was. 1098. And I'll put tray 4 back up on that same spot. And tray 3 will come down. Well, I don't know about that. Well, they've had most of the time in the other configuration, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. We'll get this restarted because this is the dry check. And if you've been watching for a while, you know the dry check. So I'm putting it back in, going to run it for at least 2 more hours, then take it back out and weigh it. If it loses weight during this next 2 hours, that means it's not dry right now. If it doesn't lose any weight, that means it's already dry now. And I can use the time that's already elapsed as my how long did that take number. Anyway, let's get it restarted. So I'll close the drain valve and I'm going to go more dry time. I did close the drain valve, continue, and the pump is always nice and cool. And I'll give it a little extra time in case I can't be back in time for it, because I can always bypass any of the extra time. So I'll be back in 2 or 3 hours and we'll check it again. If it doesn't lose any weight, we'll bag it. If it loses weight, it's not dry yet. Don't trust the machine to tell you that it's dry. Figure out a method that you trust to make sure it's dry. By doing it this way, I'm checking every single piece of food in there by weighing it to see if it's lost any more weight. So don't go away, we'll be back in just a second. I made it back. It's been about 2.5 hours since I restarted this. That's plenty of time to see if it stopped losing weight, especially since it's had as long as it had for the main dry cycle. It should be done. So I'll go ahead and bypass the rest of the time using the down arrow. We'll open the drain valve. Okay, and we'll get the trays checked. So tray 1, mac and cheese, nice and toasty. And it's 1117. So that's down a fraction of a gram. That's probably not a problem. Tray 2, 1032, no change. Tray 3, 1146, so no change. And tray 4. And that's down by just 1. I'm going to call that good, and we'll move things over and get them ready to bag. So we'll stop the machine with no defrost, then I'll get the defrost baffle in place, and I'll wait to turn this on until we're away from it for the bagging. Right, the time on the machine says about 52.5 hours. However, we know that a good portion of that was just the rewarming, and then it was setting for a period of time. So the total time right now should say 42.5 hours if it weren't for it waiting overnight for me. So the 42.5 hours, and then if we back that up 2.5 hours, we get about 40 hours for the batch. And so that's slightly longer than any of the previous ones for that same product. Which is not uncommon to have it 2 or 3 hours different. So I'm going to use 40 hours as my time for how long did it take. Power usage for that mixed batch was 30.43 kilowatt hours. So we'll reset that and have it ready for the next one. Now to the bagging. The mixed batch of food is done and ready for bagging, and it's just slightly less than 10 pounds before it's freeze dried because that block was light. Everything else was ½ pound and 1 pound blocks. So we can use that information for labeling our bags for rehydrating. We'll get our final weights. I've mentioned before that a lot of these weights really don't matter. If you don't want to track them, don't track them. If you know how much you put in a block or on a tray, you can just weigh it afterwards, find out what it weighs then. You'll know how much water it lost, and you could write that on a bag. Or, like my sister does, just ignore it and just add water until you're happy with the results when you rehydrate. There's no real hard and fast rule. You can eat them dry. Most of these things are delicious dry. Okay, we'll get the thermometer out. I already have my bags labeled for all the various things that I have on this batch. And so what I have is the batch number with felt pen on the bag. In case I lose this tag, I can refer back to my notes and find out what it is. When you do a mixed batch, you still got a little bit of a guessing game, but you'll have most of the information. So then it has what it is, the date that it went into the freeze dryer, the amount that it weighed before, and then the water needed. On these, I can simply tear out the bag, so zero it out with the bag on it, put this block in there, which I know was 1 pound, or about 453.5 grams, and then do the math and write that on it. So that's how I'm going to take care of this particular set. Now, I want to make sure that I keep the parts together, and these are kind of fall aparty, which is fine. So I don't want to crush these up heavily because it's got nice big chunks of the cilantro lime pulled pork, and I don't want to powder it. But I do need to break it up enough to get it in this bag. I know that this weighed about 453 grams before I started, and so if I just subtract the 138, that tells me that I need about 315 grams of water back in. And of course you could write it in ounces or milliliters, but 315 grams is 315 milliliters. So that gives me the information on rehydrating that. So we'll get these bagged real quick. And on this one, I think I'm going to just try to kind of fold it in half. I'm going to go ahead and get the other refried bean off of there and get it moved to there so I can bag them together. This was 1 pound of refried beans before I started, so I'll get that in the bag. And these I could crush up or just leave the way they are. It doesn't really matter. So I'm going to see if I can just slide that in there because it's about to fall apart anyway. Okay, those are in there, and if I just give it even a little bit of a squish, you can see it just turns to powder. So that needed about 329 grams back in. This little block of crushed tomatoes, since I only had one, I didn't bother printing a label. So I'll zero that out. And to get that into there, I am going to crush that up since it was crushed tomatoes. I'm going to go ahead, and boy, this is just like styrofoam piece. It's kind of cool. So just going to give that a quick crush, and that started at 380 grams. So I'll write that on there. I couldn't remember because I'd written it on there instead of in the book. And then I can pour this into the bag. So 380 grams would have been about 1.5 cups of crushed tomatoes. And so it was 380, so it needs about 341 grams put back in. I'll just put 340, that's close enough. So some of the things weigh very little after they're freeze dried. It's almost all water. Gonna go ahead and get the rice next. Gonna move this block of mac and cheese to this one, because I know that then I've got 3 1 pound amounts on there. For my bags of rice, I already have them labeled also. I just need to add how much water is needed, and I'll do that the same way by tearing out the scale or zeroing out the scale, adding 1 block of rice, and then weighing it again. And on these, I do need to crush those up a little bit. All right, that'll close just fine. So that works out to 283 grams. And 1 more block of rice, and I think I'm going to put it in there as 2 pieces again. So if it's a very thick, rich broth, sometimes it sticks the grains together pretty well. So the only one left is the mac and cheese, and we'll do that a similar way. And we've done mac and cheese before, in fact fairly recently, And one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of the instant clear gel so that when I rehydrate it, the sauce re-thickens, because it's not made to be frozen and thawed. So this sauce gets runny. A lot of sauces are not made for being frozen, and so they'll tend to get runny when you freeze them and then thaw them. And freeze drying and thawing or rehydrating works about the same as freezing and rehydrating. So I'm going to add a teaspoon for each of the half blocks, and then I'll crush these up lightly because I don't want to break the macaronis. I just want to break the sauce apart. And so it doesn't take very much. It's a lot easier than that particular batch of rice was. By putting the instant clear gel in now, which I remembered instead of waiting for the bag, then it kind of coats everything and it's distributed well when you go to rehydrate it, and you don't end up with any instant clear gel clumps because it wants to thicken the water right away. And then we can weigh that. 150. So 453 minus 150, we need approximately 300 grams of water. I'd never even heard of instant clear gel until recently, but I've used it a few times for some fruits and some stews and sauces. I'm real happy with it. There's probably other thickeners that would work very well, and some of them require cooking to thicken. So that's why I decided to go with this one that didn't, because I figured a lot of the rehydration would just be pouring hot water on it, so not really cooking it. It doesn't really have enough heat energy to work as well. It's pretty much the same. I'm going to use 300 grams again. Okay, finally, last bag. We haven't rehydrated enough of these to really know if 2 teaspoons is the right amount. So I'm guessing. I can always add more after we rehydrate it, and close enough to the same as the others to just use 300. I've got everything bagged. So I've got things bagged in 9 1-quart bags and 1 pint bag. I'm going to add 300 cc oxygen absorbers to each one of these and then zipper them shut, and then we'll heat seal them. I'm going to try to tuck the oxygen absorber down the side a bit so that it doesn't end up in the seal or zipper area. Okay, and then I'll close them up and zipper them shut, trying to squeeze out any extra air that I can. Heat sealing time. Same as always, going to try to get the very top of the bag. This particular one has a 5mm wide seal strip, and I'm going to try to get the top 5mm or 6mm and leave myself room for additional ones later. Doing the first time twice because mine has a big metal body on here that the heat strip is on. So I've got it up high, a good seal. I've got room for 2 or 3 more tries if I mess up on that one, or if I just don't like the looks of that seal. If a seal has a wrinkle, then I'll try it again because I want a nice smooth seal. And I'm using an Impact brand sealer, an Impact brand impulse sealer. As usual, before putting them in bins on the shelf for storage, I'm going to add the gross weight of each bag. That one's jumping from 150 to 151, so I'm going to use the higher number, 151. So this bag weighs 151 grams as it sits right now. If it starts to fail and water gets in, I'll know because it'll start to get heavier. So I'll weigh each bag, mark the amount on it, and then we can get them over to the bins and get them on the shelves. Yeehaw! With all the bags sealed and labeled, now it's time to get them in a bin. Our database shows where everything is that we have, so we can sort it by location, by date, or by food. But what it can't tell me, the way we've set it up, very easily, I mean, I could go through it and kind of count, but anyway, what it doesn't tell me right off or as an item line is which bins are about empty. So when I find bins, when we empty bins or when we take things out of bins and it becomes pretty low, we put a little tag here just to tell me where they are so I can add to it. So this lets me know that the bin behind this one has space. So we'll get these 10 bags in that bin for storage. These will be listed on our database for bin 7B. So when we want to find this particular set, we can. And if we ever had a problem with a specific bag or from a batch, we could find all the pieces out of that batch or all the bags out of that batch by looking at our database. So even if we end up with them in different bins, we can find everything. So until the next one, thanks for watching.